Welcome to the Career Advantage Show, where we help you reclaim your career power and design your working life on your terms. I'm Tony Pisanelli, and each week I sit down with leaders who have faced career-defining moments, such as a devastating job loss, burnout, stagnation, or even workplace harassment, and being able to turn these difficult circumstances into powerful and greater opportunities. Welcome to the Career Advantage Show, and today my special guest is Wendy Corner. Welcome, Wendy.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Now, Wendy, you've got a interesting career journey. You're a TEDx mentor and coach, and you help people write books, correct?
Yes.
And also, before that journey came along, you were a speech therapist for over 3 decades. Can you share with my community how someone goes from speech therapy to a speaker coach and mentor? How does that journey morph?
Okay. Well, that journey was not one that I anticipated and not one that I would have chosen. However, I won't go into the details, but the company that was employing me decided to let me go. So therefore, I am now out on my own and going, what am I going to do? By this point, I had already been headhunted by the TEDx team at the University of Western Australia because they'd heard the sort of things I was getting up to, because the work I was doing as a speech pathologist was not your lisps. It was nothing to do with childhood articulation. It was working with adults and getting them to be able to express themselves more clearly. So they'd heard about the work that I was doing, they'd heard about the systems that I was running, and the woman in charge headhunted me, which was very reassuring. That felt really nice to be wanted like that, particularly as I was then getting unwanted from the other job. So that was how it started. And then it was a case of, well, what are my skills? I have skills in communication. How can we use those to support speakers, business people, writers, authors, people who are involved in front-on communication?
Okay, so just going back briefly to your job loss situation, was that a particularly difficult time for you, or were you able to lift yourself out of that quite quickly?
I've got to be careful on this one because of potential legal things. However, the company, it was during my 2 years sponsored permanent residency. And so I couldn't go and work for anybody else in that time. And the immigration department said they would get back to me. They never did. So for 15 months of the 24 months that I was due to work for them, I was not able to work for anyone. Because, of course, as soon as I put in, as soon as a PAYE went in, as soon as a tax return went in, the ATO would have gone, hang on a minute, her tax number should be attached to this job. Why is she working here? I would have been in breach of my permanent residency, and off I would have gone, being deported back to the UK. So was it an interesting time? Oh, yes, it was. And that was a very definite, I mean, when you and I discussed grief around roles when the roles were reversed and you were on my podcast, absolutely, I understand the grief around losing not just as simply a role, but also an identity, because I had made the assumption that after I left university, that would have been me as a speech pathologist until the day I retired. And the identity was attached to that. And now I'm no longer a speech pathologist. Who am I? So yes, there was a real grief situation in there.
Yes, you lose more than a job. You lose a sense of self, don't we?
Absolutely, yes.
Yes. But obviously, you've obviously been able to transition into something else and given birth to your own sort of business where you're now managing your own business. Now, can I just ask, the challenges people have, they say one of the biggest fears is people getting on a stage and speaking. How do you help
Yes.
your clientele overcome that significant fear barrier?
Well, the first thing I do is point out to them that they are not alone, and it's actually hardwired. Because if, from an evolutionary perspective, if you said something that was different from the tribe, you were ostracized, you were put out. And if that was the case, that literally meant death, because you were no longer part of the community, you were no longer being supported by the community, and you quite literally were going to die because you'd be prey to a marauding saber-toothed tiger or whatever. So that fear of being exposed, of speaking up in public, is actually hardwired into our DNA. So once we get past it's not your fault, really, honestly, it's part of your conditioning, then we can move on to, why are you on stage? Is it about you? Is it about your audience? Now, when we can flip it around to the fact that I'm here to support my audience, I'm here to share something really valuable with my audience. And let's face it, the audience is sitting there thinking, I'm glad it's them, they're not me, because they're also thinking, I wouldn't want to do that. The point is, if you can flip the focus, it's not about me, it's about my message, it's about the audience. Then the nerves dissipate. I won't say they go completely, but they certainly dissipate.
Right. Yes, because I remember in my corporate days, Wendy, me and a senior colleague, who was my manager at the time, were asked to give a training program for half a day. The gentleman's name was David, and I sensed while we were driving to the venue, he was extremely nervous. And I said, Dave, why are you? You're the senior person here, and I'm the junior. And he said, Tony, many years ago, I had to present in front of a group of unionists. And clearly they didn't like the message he had to convey. So he was shredded.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he was obviously, whatever, he didn't go into much detail, but he carried that forward. Because you think, well, the next time there's someone sitting in the audience and they're going to come after me.
Yeah.
How would you help someone through that potential dynamic?
That's where we do a little bit of mindset work, because I mean, I've interviewed an awful lot of people for a podcast called From Page to Stage, and you were one of my guests. One of the things that an awful lot of the North American guests have done, they had to do class presentations in school. And that's where you find a trauma happened, because they froze, they were teased, they were shut down, diddly-da, and therefore, as an adult, as a business person, as an author, they didn't want to actually say anything, because that memory, that somatic memory, is so strong. So we do a bit of work. I've worked with people to let go of the trauma. We've done some work in terms of quite literally releasing the trauma from within their body. This is something that's a little bit left field when it comes to most people's speaker coaching. It's another modality I have, but I also work with them in terms of as I said, the mindset, looking at what happened, how can we get past it. There's also some neuro-linguistic programming techniques I use, potentially go into some hypnosis stuff. So I've got a quite a big toolkit when it comes to the ones who go, oh, I don't want to go there again. And that's also the case with some of the authors that I've worked with who are talking about their origin stories. They've written them down in a book, and that was tough enough because they've got some fairly big traumas that they've been dealing with. And now you want me to talk about it? So that's where we have to do a little bit of work under the surface to get past that.
Okay, so you do recognise that, as well as being in our DNA about getting in front of a group and presenting a message that may be contrary to the herd, there's also a personal story potentially further
Oh,
creating
yes,
inhibition. Okay. All right.
definitely.
Well, that's interesting to know, because I know I do a lot of marketing, reading on different marketing techniques and strategies. And they say when you become a speaker, you need to stand out and potentially share a contrarian message, not a message that everyone else is sharing. Otherwise,
Yes.
you don't have a unique angle.
Mm-hmm.
And why are you worth listening to? So that becomes another pressure point, doesn't it? I'm now actually going to put out a opposite message than what people are expecting. How am I going to be received?
Mm-hmm.
How do you walk someone through that resistance?
I would usually advise them to preface what they're going to say with, I know what you think I'm going to say, but I'm going to ask you to suspend your disbelief. And one of the things I've done with people is, you know, that door that you walked through, I want you to mentally go back and hang up your beliefs on the way in. Okay? Just so that now you're sitting down, your existing beliefs are back there. You can pick them up on the way out. But for now, I'd like you to suspend those beliefs and listen with an open mind. And then you go into the hook, which is a
Right.
case of saying, I'm sorry, you did what? I mean, and particularly if you have a phrase that most people could fill in the blanks and you change significant words in there so that it's what we call a pattern interrupt, people are going to go, oh, what did you say? And they're back with you because they may have drifted off. There are all sorts of little speaker knacks and tricks that you can add in.
Techniques. Okay. All right. So, if I can take you back. So, I remember speaking to a lady who was a speech pathologist, and I asked her what led her to become that. And she spoke about her grandfather having throat cancer and having a voice box put in his throat. And she recognised as a teenager how important voice is to communicate and to connect with people. Do you have a similar story that motivated you to become a speech pathologist in your younger years?
Funny you should mention that. When I was 2, I had to have surgery on my finger. And back in the 60s, parents were not allowed to stay in hospital with their children. So my earliest memories of double doors closing, mum on one side and little 2-year-old me shouting and screaming for mummy on the other. And she didn't come. She couldn't come. She wasn't allowed to. At that moment, little 2-year-old Wendy said, my voice doesn't matter. Everybody else's does. That little memory got completely subdued. Didn't remember it for over 50 years. But the fact that I didn't want anybody else to experience that my voice doesn't matter was the underlying motivation for becoming a speech pathologist. When I was 4, I had morning tea with a friend of mine. My mother had a friend who had been in a lab accident. So she'd got a skin graft on her face and she'd lost a leg. She had a daughter who had Downs. And so we were having morning tea on play tea on the mat in the garden. And as I said, I was about 4, and I said to Mum afterwards, Laura's different. Yes, she's a little bit different, but like you, she likes to play. Like you, she likes to have friends. And that modeling of equality, that looking for the similarity in people, again, looking back on it, that was, I focused an awful lot of my specialism work with people with intellectual disability and focusing on the non-verbal elements in particular. So yes, there have been some things through early childhood that didn't necessarily consciously contribute to my choice of profession, but absolutely did.
Were you someone at school that spoke up, or were you reserved and introverted at school when it came to saying something?
I was put out of class for talking.
Right.
I'd always got something to say.
Okay, and that probably comes back to that moment when your mum was on the other side of the door and you weren't allowed to communicate. So, because the
Yeah.
psyche is a compensating mechanism. If you're denied something, it flips to the other side.
Mm.
And that's a powerful thing for people to realise. I know other stories of people who, for example, there was a gentleman who had about 70 or 80 pairs of shoes in his cupboard.
A gentleman.
That's an enormous amount of shoes.
Yes, I've heard of it in women, but not for fellas.
Yeah, I know. But then you find out what the story is behind that. And apparently at school, his parents didn't have money to buy him new shoes. So he always had old pairs of shoes with holes in them.
Mm-hmm.
And he would, as you know, schoolyard, kids would poke fun at him and laugh
Yep.
at him. So as an adult, he flipped to the other side. He
Mm-hmm.
made sure he always had the newest shoes. And we
Yes.
all do that. We all have that tendency to go, okay, there was something missing on this side, and I'm going to fill it up on this other side with the opposite dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Overcompensating. Yes.
Yeah. Likewise, Wendy, there's a lady in my street, English lady, born in England. And if you look at the front of her house, there's all these toys, little trinkets, which is really unusual. And they're almost consuming that whole front yard. So to most neighbours, they define her as a hoarder because she's got so much stuff. And apparently, that one neighbour who's been inside her house, she's got all these toys inside the house. And so they define her as a hoarder. But I know from the study of the psyche, no, I can guarantee you, and I haven't spoken to the lady about this, as a child, she didn't get the toys she wanted. As the adult, you flip to the other side. I've got all the toys and more. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that dynamic comes through with shoes, with toys, and with you, in your case, with speaking. Denied the
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to speak, and then you made a career out of it and made sure the next person doesn't miss out because of their voice capability and even having an important message to share to the world.
Yes, definitely.
In terms of your clientele, I know when I was in corporate, I used to look forward to going and listening to particular speakers because they were leaders in the company, in the organisation, and they were
Mm-hmm.
powerful figures. And I always looked up to them and tried to emulate them. And you turn up to their presentations and they put you to sleep. They were these dry, statistical, factual, uninspiring half-hour sessions. Now, I since have come to learn the power of story to convey a principle or a lesson or a learning or an insight rather than this dry, factual stuff. Do you want to share your take on what makes a compelling presentation from your perspective, Wendy?
Absolutely. I mean, you are so right that the boring statistical stuff, I mean, I'm sure your audience has heard that facts tell and stories sell. That's so definitely true because, I mean, I was at a business conference when there was both an actuary and a human resources chap. Now, these were back to back, and I was sitting there going, well, the actuary is going to be boring as whatever. And no, he wasn't. He obviously had some training because the first thing he did was throw up a slide of him draped over a yellow Lamborghini. Well, there's a pattern interrupt to start with because most of the time you expect to see a scantily clad lady over a sports car. Well, that immediately got the attention. And so it went on, and he told story after story after story to illustrate how important it is to have the underlying statistics in your business so that you know where you're going from an actuarial perspective. The human resources guy, which on the surface you would have thought, oh, he's got plenty of stories. Yes, he did, but he wasn't a good speaker. And it was I mean, put it this way, if you knew the company he worked for, he didn't try and disguise any of the information about the clients, and you could have worked out who he was talking about. So from my perspective, I'm getting, oh, that's a confidentiality breach. So that was my experience of 2 back-to-back role reversal potentials from the expectations. One of the things you're saying about, particularly if you've got dry stuff and if you've got PowerPoints behind you, the worst thing you can really do is have a load of text that you then read. For one thing, why are you there? Because the audience can perfectly well read your script. And the second thing is the average reading speed is 250 words a minute. The average speaking speed is 150 words a minute. So your audience has already read through all of it before you got to the end of the first couple of lines. Yes. And by which time they're going, what's for tea tonight? Well, where am I going for dinner? And you've lost them. So that is definitely one thing, audience, if you have a PowerPoint to do, please don't do a death by PowerPoint and don't do it like that. If you need something in terms of giving you the prompt, have an image that will encapsulate what you're saying so that the audience have got something to look at for the visual learners, particularly if it's something, again, that's unusual. You've got a pattern interrupt because it will bring them back to attention, and they will then associate your content, your speaking, what you're saying, alongside that video, that screen, that image. So that's the best thing. And then you tell the story around the image.
Perfect. I also remember attending a speaker day here in Melbourne, Australia, Wendy, where the last speaker of the day got up on stage, and it was a young gentleman in his early 20s. And he began his presentation with, "Get out and stay out." So that immediately grabbed your attention, and you're thinking, is there a fire in the building and we're supposed to get out of the building? But what he was talking about was getting out and staying out of your comfort zone. A key aspect of being successful today is getting out of our comfort zones.
Yes.
So he's immediately grabbed you because you now know what he's speaking about and why the message is important. And then he's grabbed your attention. He's been able to hold that by sharing stories of his journey from there on. Are you a believer that that's a powerful way to begin a speech? Start with the conflict or the message very, very early on, rather than, "I'm so-and-so, I'm here to talk to you about X, Y, and Z. It'll take 30 minutes of your time." By then, people, you've already lost them, haven't you?
Absolutely, absolutely. You start with what's known as a hook. It's
Right.
that pattern interrupt, the thing that your example absolutely showed. Get out and stay out. And everyone's going, what? And now they are intrigued. Well, what's coming now?
Yeah.
So you've got the attention. When you're speaking, the same as when you're writing, every phrase, every sentence has to earn its right to be there and has to lead on to the next thing, because otherwise it's redundant and you might just as well forget it. So it's got to earn its keep. Now, the other thing, once you've got your hook in there, the other thing that copywriters talk about is bottom line on top. So rather than wait until you get to all the way through the story before you get to the punchline, you give the punchline first and then you give the background story, because then people know where you're leading. And if you want to put a twist in there, that's often a place where you can put the plot twists in so that people don't think, oh, it's easy, I can predict it's going from A to B to C. Oh, no, we're going from A to D to C to B to A. You follow my drift. So, yes, absolutely have a pattern interrupt to start with. And as I said to you before, if you can have something like a phrase that most people are used to, are familiar with, but you tweak it slightly. I know of a book that was called Bounce Forward, because most people expect it to be bounced back. So that was an immediate pattern interrupt. And that's the sort of thing I'm talking about. So if you've got a phrase that you can slightly tweak it's enough to get people going, what? The double take. You got their attention. Now carry on.
Okay. But from my background, Wendy, as a career coach, I'm very big on people being differentiated from the crowd and offering unique value. And my view is being a powerful speaker with a unique message separates you from the crowd.
Yes.
In that case, is it worthwhile for most executives to have that speaking credential in their career profile?
Absolutely. You see, the thing about public speaking, we've already said that it's a scary thing. It's in the DNA. But if you can expand your concept of public speaking to every time you open your mouth with intention, I mean, this is public speaking, this conversation we're having now. It's going to go out to other people. But even if it wasn't, you and I are still having a conversation. It's still speaking in public. Yes. The conversation that you have with your belligerent teenager, that's still public speaking. So it's a case of looking at people's definitions. And this is one of the things that I like to blow people's ideas about in terms of their definitions. What does speaking mean? It doesn't have to be on the raised platform with a microphone in your hand and doing all the rah, rah, rah stuff. No, it doesn't. So this is, again, where I do the mindset stuff. It's what's your definition? Is that definition serving you? And so therefore, that's my perspective. That's my little tweak on things. So yes, to go back to your point, absolutely anybody would be sensible to have some form of speaking, to have some form of way of describing their unique gifts, their experience, their unique gifts. And if they can do that in story form, so much the better, because you're then bringing your audience along with you on this journey.
Well, you mentioned stories then, Wendy, and people say to me, oh, where am I getting these stories from? And I say to them, if you're aware and observant and a witness to everyday events, they're all around you. Do you concur, Wendy?
Oh, absolutely. And again, this was something that we had a good long chat about on the podcast the other way around, wasn't it? People watching. People watching is ideal fodder for picking up these stories. The sad thing is that most people these days are glued to a screen and are not necessarily aware of what's going on around them. I mean, the stories in terms of, okay, I'll give you a personal example. I'm on literally a global tour at the moment, and going into different places, there are different expectations. And I fell foul of one beautifully in Puerto Vallarta in Mexico. I went to a tortilla stand and asked for dos tortillas, por favor. And the lady looked at me and went, dos? So I said, sí, mi solo, I'm on my own. So she bundled up 2 tortillas, handed them to me, and wouldn't charge me. Now, I thought I was being very generous. When I later told my friends, they just fell off their chairs laughing. They said, you do realize that she's going to be dining out on that for days. Talk about spot the tourist. The minimum amount that you usually buy is at least 1/4 kilo. And you asked for 2? I was known by that lady. A year later, I go back, shorter hair. I happened to walk past and wave. She went, hola! So, oh boy, did she remember. But that's a story about knowing the cultural references. This is where I personally now have learned from that you stand back, you watch, you learn what's expected here. So absolutely, people watching, I think, is the best way of gathering wonderful stories.
Yes. All right. So thank you for sharing that because, yeah, a key message from today is the importance of separating yourself out from the crowd as a speaker, but also being a powerful and compelling speaker, someone who has a powerful message shared through the medium of story.
Yes.
And your background as a speech pathologist emerged out of a story of as a young child being denied communication access to a mother. So everything is a story when you look at it from that perspective. And Steve Jobs said, you can only understand things by connecting the dots looking back.
Yes.
Story in itself, stories along the way are all connection points.
Definitely.
All right, so thank you for sharing some wonderful insights. Wendy, if some of our audience would like to reach out to you, what is it that you could potentially assist them with and offer them in your current projects and assignments?
Well, I've got a number of things that I could support people with. So the best thing would be to actually just have a chat. What is it, the area that you are feeling you'd like a bit of support with? Is it writing books? Is it speaking from stage? Is it your messaging, how you're coming across when you're maybe interviewing? What is it that you most need the help with? And I can sit down with you, brainstorm what that is, and then we can work an action plan, if you will.
So they can find you at your website, Your Words Have Power?
That's a bit of an under construction thing at the moment. So no, probably the best thing to get hold of me would be through LinkedIn.
Okay, at Wendy Corner. All right.
Because if you look on it, it's Wendy Corner making a difference. Because that's the whole thing. Everything I do is aimed at making a difference, not only from my perspective, but for my clients to make a difference to their audience.
All right, so that's your tagline on LinkedIn.
Yes.
Perfect. All right, thank you for joining us today, Wendy.
Thank you for having me. It's been great, son. Very good.
Thank you. Thank you, Wendy. Thanks for tuning into the Career Advantage Show. Visit the careeradvantage.show to subscribe and claim your free Career Confidential Toolkit. If you've enjoyed today's episode, I'd truly appreciate a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. And don't forget to share it with your friends and colleagues who might need a little career inspiration.